Victoria has recorded its worst day of COVID cases since the beginning of the pandemic. Meanwhile, the Federal Health Minister, Greg Hunt, has announced at-home testing will be available as soon as November.
At this stage, they've had over 70 expressions of interest and 33 tests have already been approved for supervised use. So they will now be considered and made available if found to be safe and effective. But that's very important. The second thing is obviously to ensure that each of the states and territories is in a position to accept that. But from a national perspective, home testing will be available from the 1st of November.
The Senate Select Committee on COVID-19 has also been sitting today and was told Australia could reach the 70% fully vaccinated target for the over 16 population by the end of October.
We get to a 70% second rate dose towards the end of October. We think we potentially get to an estimated 80% second dose around mid-November. And it's conceivable that we could get to 90% if the public keep coming forward.
That's the head of the government's vaccine task force, Lieutenant General John Frewen. Senator Kristina Keneally is the Shadow Home Affairs Minister. She also sits on the Senate's COVID-19 committee. Welcome to RN Drive.
Thank you, Paul.
The Disability Royal Commission's draft report released yesterday has called for a halt to opening up until everyone with a disability has been offered the opportunity to be fully vaccinated. We heard today that less than half of all NDIS participants are fully vaccinated. Should jurisdictions such as New South Wales hold off opening until this rate is significantly higher?
Well, it was an alarming report from the Disability Royal Commission. It pointed out that although people with a disability were meant to be in phase one, they were actually deprioritized for aged care residents. Now, what wasn't clear today is why the government couldn't do aged care and disability care. Both groups are a high priority. Both groups should have been done by now. What I would point to is that it's the federal government's responsibility to ensure that people with a disability and disability support workers are vaccinated. They know that states like New South Wales are going to move to opening up on the 1st of December, even to unvaccinated people. The fact of the matter is that should be a big, shining warning light to the Morrison government to get a move on to prioritize people with a disability and disability support workers to do everything they can to ensure that they have the opportunity to be vaccinated before we open up.
When this decision was made, it appeared that the most vulnerable community, however, were the older Australians in residential care especially. We'd seen terrible death toll in the wave that came through in Victoria and to a lesser extent in New South Wales. So the government was right, was it not, to prioritise aged care?
And nobody disputes that aged care should be prioritised. Even the Disability Royal Commission finds that. The government was correct to prioritise aged care. What isn't clear and what the Disability Royal Commission certainly takes the Morrison government to task for is that they deprioritize people with a disability in residential care settings. When we open up, some of our most vulnerable citizens will be left unprotected.
Been a lot of talk about rapid home testing, and today it was announced that this would be available in Australia from November. What do you make of that decision? Do you have any concerns about how it will occur?
What we heard today is that there isn't actually a plan yet for the implementation of rapid antigen tests. And just for your listeners, these tests have been used in the United States and the United Kingdom to get people back to work safely, to get kids back to school, to see life to start to return to normal. Now, we've been making these tests in Australia and exporting them overseas. The government here has been slow to act, this time in securing and rolling out the use of these tests. Today we heard there is no clear plan yet, And there still may be a range of decisions that will be taken by states rather than by the federal government as to which tests can be used and how they will be used by employers and the broader community.
If we could just move to climate, of course, the Glasgow Climate Change Summit is a matter of weeks away, with growing international pressure now on Australia to commit to net zero emissions by 2050. Labor has obviously joined the calls for the government to release its plan. But I suppose the other question is, why won't your party release yours?
Well, you make the point about the upcoming Glasgow summit, the COP26 as it's called. Like it or not, only the Morrison government will represent Australia in Glasgow in November, so only they can update our targets for this year. But Labor's position is clear. The government should take a higher medium-term target to COP26.
And give us a bit more of an indication of how much more ambitious that target should be?
Well, again, only the government gets to set the target this year, and we will not have a change of government before that Glasgow conference. We've been clear for some time now that Australia needs to set a net zero emissions target of 2050. We've been clear that that will mean higher medium-term targets. And we've also been clear that before the election, we will outline our positions. This government can't even decide to set itself a target for 2050. And when you see the likes of Bridget McKenzie throwing, missiles at Josh Frydenberg, when Matt Canavan and the so-called modern liberals are arguing with one another online, what hope do we have that the Morrison government can lay out both a target and a plan?
In fairness, it's not as if your party has been untouched by these internal disputes over climate change policy as well. Well documented. Queensland government, just for example, behind one of the biggest coal mines in Australia, Queensland Labor government, and this has been an issue that has caused your party heartburn. And I suppose some people are wondering, is this why they're refusing to commit now?
Not at all. I've just outlined our three commitments. One, net zero emissions by 2050. Two, that we should have a higher medium-term target. And three, in the lead up to Glasgow, it is not for us to set that target. Now, before an election, we will outline our commitments.
When can we expect then a more detailed plan?
As both Anthony Albanese and our shadow spokesperson on climate change, Chris Bowen, has made clear, we will outline our plans before the next election.
Just on the pre-selection issue that people have been talking about, Tu Lee, the candidate who missed out on being endorsed by the party for the seat of Fowler in preference for you, spoke on 7:30 last night on the ABC. She said what's happened is a big disappointment for her community. You are undoubtedly a strong candidate with experience. Do you acknowledge, though, that it is a bad look?
I want to make 3 points on this question. One, the Labor Party is led by Anthony Albanese in the House and Penny Wong in the Senate. And you can hardly say that the Labor Party doesn't value and support people from a wide variety of backgrounds. Indeed, I somewhat reflect a bit ironically that for nearly 20 years now during my time in public life, I'm often told that I'm not really Australian because I have a so-called funny accent. Secondly, I'll make the point about Fowler in particular. Yes, it has a strong Vietnamese community. It also has a strong Chinese community, one of the largest Assyrian communities in Australia, an Iraqi community, Cambodian, Italian, Serbians, Croatians, Turkish community, and indeed a fairly sizable Anglo-Australian community. And I make that point because I think it's dangerous if we start to boil down people just to their multicultural backgrounds. That can lead us to a divisive identity politics that doesn't bring a community together.
I don't think we're talking about that, though. I mean, we're talking really about the fact that Asian Australians are criminally underrepresented in the parliament. Let's be honest about it. Here's an opportunity for Labor to pre-select somebody from that background in a community where there are many people from that cultural background, and they've chosen not to.
And there are other considerations that go into pre-selection, including the fact that Fowler, as a community in southwestern Sydney that's been left behind by both a state and federal Liberal governments, particularly harshly during this pandemic, has never been represented by either a shadow minister or a minister, and does deserve to have a voice at the highest level of government. Quite frankly, to boil down discussions about diversity to one seat, I think misses a broader point about the parliament as a whole. And let me go to that as my third point. And I really do hope that that you and other journalists ask Liberals these same questions, because when I look across the aisle in the parliament to my counterparts in the Liberal Party, it strikes me they must have a factory somewhere where they stamp out an almost interchangeable conga line of middle-aged men who come roughly from the same background.
I would ask them the same. I would put the same point to them, frankly.
This is a party that doesn't even have a target or a quota for a meaningful target or a realistic target or quota for gender diversity.
But we're talking here about parachuting you into a seat when grassroots candidates have said that they would like to see representation from their community in that seat, from more diverse backgrounds.
And I've just made the point that this is an incredibly diverse community that can't be boiled down to any particular multicultural group, nor do I think that our politics is well served as if that is how we start to view communities. The Labor Party made a decision in Fowler to give it a voice at the highest levels of government, a senior front bencher. And that was a decision that was supported by rank and file branch members. And I acknowledge and thank the dozens of rank and file branch members in Fowler who supported my nomination, indeed even approached me originally to run.
Just a final quick one, if I can. You've called out the involvement of right-wing extremists in last week's Melbourne protests. What needs to happen to reduce the likelihood of repeats of those scenes?
It has been quite disturbing, hasn't it, to watch and from New South Wales to watch from afar, but certainly for people in Melbourne to be confronted with that type of violent far-right views. To be sure, there were likely some people in the protests, particularly initially, who were concerned about vaccination. But what we know from our national security agencies is that far-right extremists have been exploiting COVID, have been using disinformation to undermine the vaccine rollout and to recruit and propagandize to their own hate-filled, divisive ideology. Right now, there is an inquiry before the Intelligence and Security Committee, indeed an inquiry I got up into right-wing extremism. There is more that we need to do as a country to prescribe right-wing extremist groups as terrorist organisations. There are right-wing extremist groups in Australia today that are prescribed by our Five Eyes partners, particularly in the UK and Canada, that are not prescribed here. That is an action the government should take to send a clear message about what we reject in our multicultural, diverse community.
Kristina Keneally, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
That's the Shadow Home Affairs Minister, Kristina Keneally. This is RN Drive.